In the third cave at Qumran, a copper scroll was found. It is a list of treasure sites. It lists a place name and describes where a certain kind of treasure is hidden, and it says what the treasure is.
Josephus makes it clear in his discussion of the uprising against Rome from 66 to 70 and on to Masada in 73 that the Romans tortured the temple treasurer and found out the hiding places of the temple treasure. I think you won't find much. The Romans were very persuasive and extremely covetous.
It may not seem as exciting as Indiana Jones finding the Ark of the Covenant, but the discovery of hundreds of ancient manuscripts in the caves near the Dead Sea is certainly more significant, because it really happened. Before the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, the most ancient Old Testament manuscripts dated from the 10th century A.D. The Dead Sea Scrolls are 1,000 years older than that. Do the almost magical truths hidden in the ancient Hebrew parchments have the power to change the direction of nations and peoples today? I'm Dwight Nelson. Let's take a look at the evidence.
There are lots of stories about how and when the scrolls were first discovered. Most of them center about a young shepherd, Bedouin shepherd boy who was looking for lost sheep. These are well-known stories, but I think they're a little romanticized. The young shepherd boy turns out to be someone in his 30s. He was a known treasure hunter. He was always looking out for things, and one day, while he may have been also shepherding animals, he was looking in caves near the Dead Sea and happened to throw a rock in this given cave that we now call Cave 1, and instead of hearing just the clatter of a rock, he heard kaplunk, kaplunk, and the sound of broken pottery.
Venturing into the cave, the shepherd soon discovered the pottery held hundreds of ancient manuscripts. Anxious to capitalize on his find, he quickly sold the scrolls. Once in the hands of scholars, it was soon realized that these tattered documents may shatter the foundation of the world's most dominant religion.
The public at large only thought that the scrolls were found in 47 in Cave 1, because those scrolls were immediately publicized, went into, after the founding the State of Israel, a special museum was built to house them called the Shrine of the Book. And the public thought that was what the scrolls were. But no, over the next decade, 10 other caves were found. An international team was established by the Jordanian government to oversee those scrolls, since it, as a non-Christian Jewish monarchy, didn't feel particularly interested in these scrolls. So what happened was these scholars, owing to a different mix of motives, held back the publication of these scrolls. People who were in the inner sanctum said to peers, "Let's go slow till the crazies go away." Now, the issue of the crazies going away has to do with the issue of how the scrolls affect Judaism and Christianity. There was a famous left-wing writer who, his name was Edmund Wilson. He wrote for the New Yorker magazine a series of articles on the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1954. And he began to suggest that the scrolls had something could throw light on the origins of Christianity. And the people who had gained control of the scrolls through the Jordanian government setting up this international committee were largely church people, clerics. So when they heard what Edmund Wilson was suggesting in the New Yorker magazine, a whole blanket of secrecy went over the scrolls.
Well, one text raised the question about whether the scrolls had information that was damaging or would put a very different light on, say, Christian origins than has traditionally been thought. A small fragment that did not appear in public until perhaps around 1990 even though it had been known about long before this, spoke about a Messiah who possibly was killed by someone else. So it was claimed, this fragment said, and that because it contained information about a Messiah who was killed, a Messiah before the time of Jesus, it was claimed that this kind of parallel was somehow damaging to Christianity in the sense of detracting from its uniqueness.
According to mainline scholars, there's nothing here that would affect the faith of the faithful, and that the scrolls do not contradict or upset any of the religious materials that we presently have. According to opposition scholars, just the opposite is true, that there are materials in the scrolls that seriously call into question the kind of messianism portrayed in the documents that we are familiar with and know as the Gospels. If Jesus were alive today, and there were things done or said in his name that were not his, he would expect you to find this out. So I think that any person of faith, before they move into faith, and I've had people who say, well, faith is anything I believe it is. I don't agree with that. Faith should be based on something solid, on a rock, if you like. And I think that the modern person wants to look into this and be challenged and find out what, in fact, recommends itself to his faith and what he may find as different from his faith.
This is Hello Channel. Come learn English as you watch TV. It will change your life.
Part of what's intriguing about the Dead Sea Scrolls is the kind of words that come up. Words like pseudepigrapha. I love how that rolls off the tongue. Pseudepigrapha. Or how about apocrypha, or even apocalyptic? Each of these words is used to describe various scrolls that relate to the Bible but are not necessarily included in it. While they may not have made it into the Bible, they were obviously considered important enough to be laboriously copied and carefully hidden from invading armies. Who were these people who took such great care to copy and protect the scrolls? The scrolls were found in Qumran, located on the northwest shore of the Dead Sea, 15 miles east of Jerusalem. Nothing more than sand and mud bricks now, Qumran may have been a permanent settlement for a radical Jewish sect.
The residents of Qumran, according to most scholars, were a small group of the party that we call the Essenes, one of the three major Jewish groups back in the time of the scrolls. We have one ancient text written by a Roman author, Pliny the Elder as he's known, who mentions that there was a group of Essenes living on the northwest shore of the Dead Sea. They believed that they had a special role in history, that the ancient prophecies in the Bible pointed to them and were being fulfilled in connection with them. And they also believed they were living very near the end of time. They anticipated the arrival of two messiahs. One was from the line of David, and one was to be a priest. And they were to be the leaders of the forces of good at the end of time.
Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls present a situation where they are in camps, wilderness camps, following a regime of extreme purity, waiting for the heavenly host that will join them under the leadership of the Messiah in this final apocalyptic war against all evil on the earth. Now, to my mind, that is information that rarely gets out to the public at large, and they have no understanding of what the scrolls really believe, and they don't understand how much it is like what they believe.
As more and more of the scrolls have been translated, the concept of divine inspiration, that everything written in the Bible is the exact Word of God and not the thoughts of man, has been challenged and cast in a new light.
You have in the Dead Sea Scrolls the confirmation that the Bible, as we have it and know it, is fairly accurate.
Right from the very first cave discovered, there were 2 Isaiah scrolls found there. And one of the Isaiah scrolls is almost word for word and even letter for letter like our traditional text of Isaiah. So I think it is reasonable to conclude and to make the statement that our biblical text that we have right now is just amazingly accurately copied from scrolls 2,000 years ago. We have, in one sense, copied text very, very accurately, and that is amazing because you have to copy, hand copy, all the way from the period of the exile or thereabouts up to the invention of the printing press. All those manuscripts had to be hand copied, and they are amazingly faithfully done. However, that's only the copy of one form of the text as it existed back then.
The scrolls are only relating to the Old Testament and the books of the Bible that we know. Now the scrolls have more than just the books of the Bible that we know. There's about 300 or 400 other books that relate to the literature of the scroll community itself that we call the extra biblical material or the sectarian material, because these are books never seen before, or in some cases books we've known about from other sources like Enoch or the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs or Jubilees or things like that that the scrolls are very strong on, things that were called apocryphal literature. Now the scrolls don't make any distinction between these books. They're all equally holy as far as the scrolls, or unholy as far as the scrolls go. All the scrolls are thrown into the caves helter-skelter. They don't have a Bible, as it were.
Until 1947, we saw the biblical text as unique, single, uniform, as they call it, a stabilized Hebrew text. But now we can show we've got documentary evidence of differing literary editions of over half of our Hebrew Bible books.
We have many copies of books of the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible among the scrolls. Sometimes we have multiple copies of individual books, and they don't always agree precisely in their wording. We have different copies of the book of Jeremiah, and we have evidence that the people of the scrolls knew of a much shorter version of the book of Jeremiah than is printed in Bibles today. All of this has been studied a great deal by the scholars of the Bible, of the text of the Bible, and it's evident that there were different editions of many of the books in the Bible that were circulating among Jewish people in the last couple of centuries BC, in the 1st century AD. These different copies show us that the texts of these books continued to develop. They had been written long before this, and of course had been copied for many years, but they continued to develop and took on somewhat different forms.
This complicates efforts at trying to understand and explain how theories of inspiration and revelation really work out in practice, because where do we see the act of revelation? Where do we see the act of inspiration? Is it confined to the original, if we can get the original, or does the inspiration continue in the lines of translators and copyists and things like that? It's very difficult to understand, but I think the more we look at the biblical scrolls in general, the more we would have to see that inspiration is spread out much more broadly than we had earlier anticipated.
Because the Dead Sea Scrolls are so old, just about all of the material they contain has to do with the older part of the Bible, the Old Testament. But do they shed some light on our understanding of the New Testament and add to our knowledge of Jesus?
So far as we know, no Christian text or New Testament text has been found among the scrolls, despite claims that have been made that there are a few fragments of them.
There were some claims made that there were perhaps a version of the Gospel of Mark because some Greek fragments were found. This was claimed in the 50s by a Spanish researcher. Most people don't think that those Greek fragments do represent Mark. And in my personal view, Mark has such a different ethos than the Dead Sea Scrolls.
The scrolls, while they were written by Jewish people, they are Jewish texts, have nevertheless had quite an influence on the study of the New Testament, simply because they tell us so much about Judaism at the time that the first Christians and Jesus lived.
Many people base their faith on the Bible, Jesus Christ. Well, the scrolls tell them what was going on in Palestine at the time their faith was being set forth.
One of the things that's really fascinating about the scrolls, how they illumine our knowledge more than we had before, is that they show us documentary evidence now of a prior period in the history of the biblical text where we could only speculate.
The scrolls are a time capsule to the past. The scrolls are something that have been placed in caves and untouched for almost 2,000 years and give us almost a living witness without editorializing or the retrospective imposition of historical consensus on data right from the time of Jesus.
We know much more about the world in which Jesus and his disciples lived in Judea and in Galilee. I think some references in the New Testament become clearer as a result of this.
The Dead Sea Scrolls provide written records of a period of history for which other documents are very scarce. Because of that, they give us a key to understanding society at the time early Christianity developed. Dr. Peter Flint has seen, has touched, and has read the original manuscripts. When we come back, he'll talk with us about the meaning of the Dead Sea Scrolls for today.
Learning a new language can be difficult and discouraging, but it doesn't have to be. Hello, I'm Karen, introducing Hello Channel, the revolutionary new channel designed especially to teach English. If you can speak English, the future is open for you, since speaking English means greater opportunity and higher paying jobs. By watching Hello Channel, you are immersed in this valuable language. You'll hear the words being spoken. You'll see the speakers' mouths when they say the words. You'll read what's being spoken in large, clear subtitles. And you'll speak out loud, practicing what you have just learned. There is no better or faster way to learn a language than total immersion. Hello Channel does exactly that. There's programming on every level so you can watch the shows that are just perfect for you. Whether you've spoken a little English, a great deal of English, or none at all, the Hello Channel has something for everyone. Join us for a convenient, affordable, and fun way to shape your future. There's so much in store for you if you'll just say hello.
Get ready for a fascinating interview with the man who wrote the first book on the Dead Sea Scrolls in the new millennium, Dr. Peter Flint. Welcome to The Evidence.
Thank you, Dwight.
Title of that book, The Meaning of the Dead Sea Scrolls. You've been living with the scrolls for years. In fact, I have here the book you collaborated on, one of the three editors, the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible, where you translated the biblical portions of those ancient scrolls. Share a New Testament example that would link the scrolls with New Testament material.
I need to turn to some specific writings here.
Okay.
In Luke chapter 7.
And that's New Testament.
This is in the New Testament.
Okay.
Luke
All
chapter
right.
7, Jesus is asked a key question. Are you really the Messiah, the one who is to come? And this is his answer. Go and tell your leader what you've seen and heard. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor have good news brought to them. Now, scholars have thought, now this is very strange. He doesn't say, hey, I'm the Messiah. He says, go and tell what you've seen. And there's one saying in here that's very strange. Jesus even says the dead are being raised. And a lot of people have thought, no way, this couldn't be genuine. This must come from the later church. They must have put these words in the mouth of Jesus. In the light of the scrolls, we can demonstrate that this statement is actually a messianic claim by Jesus. He's saying, I'm the Messiah. Let me
Those
prove
words,
it to you.
You're saying those words are actually a quotation from that appears in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Well, it's not quite a quotation, but those words appear in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'll give you, it's one of the scrolls called 4Q 521. Now,
that's the name of the scroll.
That's shorthand. You see, scholars like to do that. 4Q means cave 4 at Qumran.
I see.
521 is number 521.
Okay.
A shorthand way of referring to a scroll from cave 4.
Okay.
And I'll just give you a couple of lines. It talks about the coming of the Messiah. And look at these words. It goes on, he will release the captives, he will make the blind to see, he will raise up the oppressed. And then it goes on, and as for the wonders that are not the work of the Lord, when the Messiah comes, God will heal the sick, raise the dead, and to the poor announce glad tidings. Now, what does all this mean? Simply this, is that when Jesus is asked, are you the Messiah? He is saying, look guys, there's a recipe. Go and tell what you've heard. A, B, C, D, E. 4Q 521 gives us independent verification, pre-Christian, 100 BC, that many Jews were expecting a recipe when the Messiah comes. A, B, C, D, E. We see it there, and it's repeated in the New Testament 100 years later or more, showing that Jesus must have talked like that because other Jews thought that way. So this shows us that our faith is historic, it's ancient, that many of the things we believe are reliable and are not just modern inventions. The way I like to put it is the scrolls help the thinking man or woman look at the faith and come to conclusions. Even without the Bible or the church, you can look at the scrolls and find that the faith is reasonable and makes sense and is life-giving.
Dr. Peter Flint, thank you for being on The Evidence and sharing your research with us.
Thank you, Dwight.
It is truly a fascinating realm of study, this whole matter of the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you'd like more information on these scrolls, want to get deeper yourself in your own personal study, log on to our website. We'll put the address on the screen right now, theevidence.tv. The material will be waiting for you when you log on. I'll be back in just a moment. The Dead Sea Scrolls have it all: drama, intrigue, politics, religion, secrecy, history, prophecy. It's all there, not only in the ancient texts themselves, but in the incredible stories surrounding them and their impact on the scholarly world. But for now, the question is, what do they mean for the rest of us? What they mean to me is that God doesn't ask us to suspend our intellect or reason to believe in Him. He doesn't ask us to trust in the Bible blindly. On the contrary, in an age where the Bible has faced such scrutiny regarding its origin, its credibility, and its reliability, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the way that they affirm the integrity of the Old Testament texts go a long way in supporting the accuracy of the Hebrew Bible. The Dead Sea Scrolls, in many ways, answer probing questions regarding the credibility of the Bible. Do the Dead Sea Scrolls prove that the Bible is the Word of God? I can't say that they do. Do the Dead Sea Scrolls even prove the existence of God? Again, I can't say they do. Do the Dead Sea Scrolls prove that the Bible is an accurate portrayal of the ancient history it tells about? I can't say that they do. But what I can say, and I can say it most emphatically, is that they prove that the Bible we have today is very much like the Bible that was read thousands of years ago. The concepts expressed by the writers have been preserved for all these years. And that, to me, is something of a miracle itself. For The Evidence, I'm Dwight Nelson.
I think that any time we forgive someone, when we feel deeply hurt, we have to come to a point in our lives where it's just not worth being unforgiving anymore.
I have not come nearly as far as Debbie with her with forgiveness. I'm still angry at the men that did this. Even though one of them's dead, I'm still angry.
Hello, I'm Dwight Nelson. Welcome to The Evidence. Debbie Morris's boyfriend was tortured and left for dead. She was raped multiple times by the man Sean Penn played in the film Dead Man Walking. When you've been hurt that deeply, how can you possibly forgive?
It was the spring of 1980. On a typical Friday night in Madisonville, Louisiana, 16-year-old Debbie Morris was on a date with her boyfriend, Mark Brewster.
It was very typical that we would go get a milkshake at the end of a date and drink it on the riverfront. And we did that particular night. We went to Batto's and we got our milkshakes and we went and sat in his car on the riverfront.
The evening took an unexpected turn when two armed men hijacked Mark's car. Robert Willie got in the driver's seat, Joseph Vaquero got in the back seat and put a gun to Debbie's head. They drove out of town. It was the beginning of what would be a 30-hour ordeal. After 15 minutes of driving, they pistol-whipped Mark and forced him at gunpoint into the trunk of his car. Then Robert Willie shoved Debbie into the back seat and told her to remove her clothes.
And I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't imagine anything worse than what he was going to do to me. And all I could think about was just how awfully disgusting he was and what he was about to do to me.
After Robert Willie raped Debbie, they headed east, away from Madisonville, Louisiana, away from home. As they neared Mobile, Alabama, they stopped and took Mark out of the trunk of the car and put Debbie into the trunk, telling her they were going to release Mark in the woods, then release her further down the road. As they led Mark away, Debbie prayed they would keep their promise.
When I was in the trunk of the car, however, I heard the gunshots. I heard 2 gunshots. And I still didn't know what to think. I could hear Robert Willie and Joseph Vaquero come running back to the car, and they were shrieking and screaming like they were excited, like elated.
When Joseph Vaquero removed Debbie from the trunk, she asked about the gunshots. He told her they had simply fired into the air to scare Mark. Later, she found that they had hung Mark from a tree, stabbed him in the side, cut his throat, burned him with cigarettes, and shot him in the back of the head at close range. They left him for dead, then continued east towards Florida. But realizing they had no drug connections in Florida, they turned around and headed back to Louisiana.
I felt it. I knew, whether it was instinctual or just knowing Debbie's history of responsibility, I knew something terrible had happened.
By this time, they started saying, "We know where we're going to take you. We know the perfect spot." And Robert would say that. He'd say, "Right, Joe, right?" And he would say, "Yeah, that's right. We know where we're going to take her. We have the perfect place." And I didn't know, of course, at this time that the place that they were talking about was a place called Fricky's Cave, which is where 3 days earlier they had taken another girl, an 18-year-old girl, and they raped her and stabbed her to death at this place.
They drove down the long, isolated dirt road toward Fricky's Cave, where they probably intended to kill Debbie. But on the way, they passed an old man carrying a fishing pole. It's likely Willie feared the old man would overhear the murder. So after he raped Debbie again, they left Fricky's Cave and went to drug dealer Tommy Holden's trailer. There, Debbie was raped yet again, this time by Joe Vaquero.
I was in the little living room area, and he was down the hall, and he called me down the hall. And I thought maybe he was going to show me a way out, a back way out or something. And I went down there, and he told me very politely that it was his turn to have sex with me now.
After Vaccaro violated her, Debbie was tied up so the kidnappers could sleep. In the early hours of Sunday morning, drug dealer Tommy Holden sobered up enough to realize Debbie was underage and being held against her will. He demanded she be taken home. Robert Willie initially agreed, but insisted they first destroy the hijacked vehicle.
At this point, Robert Willie started saying that he didn't want to let me go. And when Tommy Holden was frustrated, he walked back over to the car, and I asked him about it. I said, they don't want to let me go, do they? And he admitted that they didn't want to let me go. And I said, they want to kill me, don't they? And he said, yes, that's what they're talking about. And I heard Robert Willie say that they should just burn me up in the trunk of the car.
We learned English.
Your kids can too.
Just watch Hello Channel.
Welcome back to The Evidence. When Debbie Morris heard Robert Willie say that they should lock her inside the trunk of the car, then burn it, she decided to make a run for it. She had little hope of escape, but she knew she'd rather die by being shot than by being burned alive.
I was just about to take off running when Robert Willie said, fine, we'll take her home. We'll just take her home. We're making a mistake, but we'll just take her home. And they did. As I was getting out of the car, and they were actually letting me out of the car, I thought that they were either going to shoot me or that they were going to run me over with the car. I really didn't think that they were going to let me go. And by that time, I couldn't even run. I just was willing to let whatever was going to happen, happen. And when they drove off, I just couldn't believe it. My heart just started pounding. And I just started running.
She ran to her uncle's store and told him to hide with her behind the counter. She was afraid her kidnappers would come back. She grabbed the telephone off the counter and called her mom.
And I told her not to tell anybody where she was going, just to get in the car and come get me.
2 minutes later, Debbie's mom pulled into the parking lot. She ran out, opened the car door, and the first thing both she and her mother said was, "Where's Mark?" Debbie knew something terrible had happened to him. She gave a detailed description to the police of where Mark had been left. They found him, barely conscious, but alive. Debbie immediately went to the hospital to see him.
I could tell that Mark was relieved to see me. And he did certain things. He reached up to touch my neck, my throat, because he had been cut on the throat, and his throat had been slashed several times across. And I think he was just trying to make sure that they hadn't done those things to me. I was very moved at the time by the fact that Mark was the one who was lying there in such serious condition, but he still was just concerned about me.
Right after the kidnapping, we went through a period where she was terrified. For a few days after the kidnapping, just to go into the bathroom alone and shut the door would have been too much for her.
I think just all of her life kind of fell apart. She changed a lot from before it happened. She changed a tremendous amount.
You would think that after surviving a near-death experience, in my kidnapping and rape and all, that I would embrace life and not want to put myself back in danger. When it seems, when I look back, it seems just the opposite. It seems like whatever they didn't do to me, I was determined to do to myself.
There were times that I, cried myself to sleep. There were times that I felt like Debbie had been so wronged and so hurt that, would her life ever be okay?
Every single night that I went to sleep, the last thing I thought about was what if I wake up and he's there?
My big fear was that somehow he would get out of prison. We had heard from one of the officers that he had said that if he ever got the opportunity to do so, he would cut her up so badly that even her mother wouldn't recognize her.
I lived with that fear, and I believed him. And he had actually escaped from that local jail before.
I had someone call me in the middle of the night, a hitman, that I had no idea who he was. And he said, if you want them dead, they will be. And at the time I said no. You know, I believe that the process will take care of it. And thank God that I did believe that.
During the trial, Debbie avoided eye contact with Robert Willie. On the other hand, Robert blew kisses at Debbie and made crude noises. He looked right at Mark and drew a finger across his neck. He bragged of other crimes he had committed and referred to himself as Jesse James. Like Jesse James, he was finally sentenced to death.
Just the idea that there was a person who was actually going to die it was hard to comprehend, really. And I started envisioning them walking him into this room and strapping him down on this chair. And while people watched, killing him.
I wanted Robert Willie dead. I know that. At the time, I did. I don't know how I feel about that today.
I thought that I would feel excited, happiness, something like that. I knew by the time the execution occurred that I would not feel that. But I didn't expect the numbness that I felt.
I can remember one of the things that I hung on to was something that my father had said shortly after the kidnapping. He said, he said, for some reason, for Debbie to have survived this, God had a plan for her. He said something good will come out of this because otherwise she'd be dead. You know, God had a plan. And I kept trying to realize what that plan could be. Today I know.
On December 28, 1984, Robert Willie was executed. Justice may have been served. But did Robert Willie's death heal the wounds? We'll talk to Debbie Morris and her mother, Sharon Ratliff, about what came next, right after this.
Learn English and have fun on Hello Channel.
In her book, Forgiving the Dead Man Walking, Debbie Morris recounts the story, really the chilling story of her kidnapping and subsequent ordeal. She and her mother are here to talk about that journey, a journey step by step toward forgiveness. Debbie, glad to have you. Sharon, welcome to The Evidence. You know, our last segment ended with you describing your emotions as you came closer and closer to the day of Robert Willie's execution. What was going on inside on that day?
You have to understand, this was a man that I had feared since the first moment I laid eyes on him.
How much time had gone by from that first moment till the execution?
4.5 years.
4.5 years.
And
wow.
for 4.5 years, he was the first thing that I thought of when I woke up, the last thing that I thought of before I went to sleep. I would say, please don't let him be standing here if I wake up in the middle of the night. I was so terrified of him.
I'm sure.
So there was this great sense of relief that I was hoping to feel when he was finally gone, and I thought that part of my life would be over and I wouldn't have to fear anymore. But at the same time, the closer the execution got, the more anxiety I felt about it.
You wake up the next morning, Debbie. What hit you when you saw that headline announced confirming the reality?
I just was numb. like I said, it's hard to describe.
Did it bring the closure you were anticipating?
No. No, and that would become even more evident in the days, the weeks, the months after.
What happens to a person to move you to that closure? Something must have happened. You've had closure.
Right, right.
What's happened? What happened along the way?
It was when I just turned back to God and sort of threw my arms up in the air and said, what's going to make this better? And how can you help me now? I give up. I'm willing to let you do it. This is just so much bigger than me.
Sharon, you come to the day of execution. Robert Willie is executed. You learn of it, obviously, the next day. The anger's gone now.
No. No.
What goes on happening?
I thought that I would get some relief. I thought that we would all be different somehow, that this would put closure on it. It really didn't. Nothing really changed. He was dead, but the feelings were still there for me.
Do you still feel anger?
Yes, I do still feel some anger. It's really hard for a mother to see her children hurt. And Debbie was severely hurt and damaged by this. It's very hard.
Experientially, what happens when a person forgives?
The whole process of forgiveness happens in steps. It's not an event. A lot of people think that it's an event, and once they say, I want to forgive, I do forgive, help me to forgive, that's it. The pain goes away, everything's okay. That's not what happens. At the time, I was sort of thinking that maybe that's what would happen. But I didn't even understand forgiveness at the time. What I wanted at that point was for the hate to go away, for this. I felt like I was the one who had been imprisoned for 4.5 years. Robert Lee Willie may have been behind bars, but I felt like I had been in prison. I wanted that gone. I wanted to quit being controlled by the past, and I wanted to all of a sudden experience a freedom that would help me be able to move into the future. That's what I wanted. I wanted it all at once that night. It didn't necessarily happen like that, but it was a step. I did feel the freedom that came with that initial step in forgiveness.
Is your journey toward forgiveness similar, or
no,
how did it happen for you?
Basically, as time went by and I saw Debbie begin to recover, I was able to let go of the anger and begin to just be grateful that today I have my daughter sitting next to me.
Is forgiveness something you simply choose to do, Debbie and Sharon? You say, well, I'm just gonna have to do it. It's a choice?
I think it is. I think it's a choice that you have to consciously make. You have to set your mind to do. Forgiveness, for me, meant that I was no longer the one who was responsible for Robert Lee Willie's fate, for vengeance against him. Forgiveness for me was very personal. It's what allowed me to be able to move on and experience God's love and grace and the peace that He would have me have.
How does God, believing in God, what does that contribute to being able to forgive someone who has wronged you so deeply? Let me go to you, Sharon.
I really didn't give it a lot of thought until Debbie started talking more about forgiveness. And one day I thought about God on the cross, Jesus on the cross. And I said, you know, His last words were, forgive them. How could I not?
Debbie, God and you, how did that make forgiving easier?
One of the things that really got my attention was when it says in the Bible that we will be forgiven as we are willing to forgive others. And when I took a look at my life, and over the 4.5 years after my kidnapping and before Robert Willie's execution, and even some time after that, I had really made a mess of my life, and I needed to be forgiven by God. I needed to be forgiven by God mostly for turning my back on Him for 4.5 years and blaming Him for what happened to me.
So forgiveness, essentially, you're describing a two-way process. It's not just me forgiving the whole world that has wronged me, but I need to seek forgiveness myself as a surviving human being.
Exactly, exactly. And for instance, for Robert Lee Willie to benefit from forgiveness, it wasn't my forgiveness that he needed. It was God's forgiveness.
Debbie, Sharon, thank you very much for coming here and sharing the story of your journey to forgiveness. God bless you both.
Thank you. Thanks.
There's more to Debbie's story. You can be sure of that. In fact, we have it on our website, The Subject of Forgiveness. The expansion of her story, you can go to our website right now. It's just one word, theevidence.org.org. I'm going to be back in just a few moments with some concluding thoughts.
Thanks for watching Hello Channel, the fun, affordable way to learn English.
One thing that intrigues me about Debbie Morris's remarkable story is the motivation behind her act of forgiveness. Debbie tells us she did this not because the man who assaulted her somehow deserved her pardon. She did it for her own good. In her book, she writes that a refusal to forgive would have meant hanging on to her pain, to her shame, to her self-pity. Debbie forgave in order to find healing. For her, it came as a gift from God. Now, it's true, forgiveness, whether divine or human, doesn't justify the terrible things that happened to us. Nor is forgiveness a way of pretending it wasn't so bad after all. It's a way of finally being set free from the hurt. Forgiveness is a divine way to take back our lives. That's what I think. I'm Dwight Nelson. Join us next time for more of The Evidence. Millions of people around the world have this book. In fact, according to one recent survey, 9 out of 10 Americans own it, but fewer than half have ever read it. Where did the Bible come from? Is it from God? Can it be trusted? I'm Dwight Nelson. Let's look at the evidence. I think for most of us, the Bible is hard to understand. It's confusing. It seems contradictory at times. To some people, it's even boring. In other words, the Bible perfectly fits Mark Twain's definition of a classic, a book which people praise and don't read. Today, we hope to change that. We start with writer-historian Dr. Kenneth Davis.
We use this book, the Bible, all the time when we're debating politics, when we're debating social issues, the whole range of them. But we never really stop and wonder, who wrote this thing? What did these things mean 4,000 years ago when they wrote it? What language did they write it in?
It's always the case that we move from a different language, culture, and time. So we have to be sensitive to TLC, to time, language, and culture, when we go back to the biblical world. And then I think we're in a better position to make the application.
The writers of the Bible were persons like us. Some were educated, some weren't. They had their own agendas, hidden and conscious and otherwise. And they functioned within a certain economic, geographic, political, and linguistic historical context.
So therefore, I'm going to try to put each writer in his historical context, put him or her in the time they were living, and you have to do that first to find out what they were saying first, and then you put the different writers together in the different time frames that they come and say, this is the picture God wants me to have.
When we read the Bible, we are always in the business of interpreting, whether we admit it or not. We are always in the business of interpreting. I did hear someone say one time that children would behave better if we would return to the Bible and do exactly what it says. And if a son curses his parents, he should be stoned. And the person, this was on a tape, and the person said, if we were to follow that today, we would have a lot less juvenile delinquency. We may have a lot less juveniles if we did that today. What I would rather look for, and here's where archaeology helps, if I could get at what those words meant to the people who first heard them, I think I'm in a better position to know what they mean to me.
If you were to invite 5 people to come together and bring their Bibles, likely as not, they'd bring 5 different books. There are Jewish Bibles and Roman Catholic Bibles and Protestant Bibles. And if that weren't enough, there are about 3,500 English versions of the Bible. Of course, the best known of all of those is the 1611 King James Version.
Most English-speaking people think that the Bible is the King James Version. It's a 300-year-old piece of literature that was often poorly translated. We know that they made mistakes in 1611. The English is archaic. God didn't say thee and thou, nor did Jesus. They spoke, certainly Jesus spoke in Aramaic, a language that is related to Hebrew. The Old Testament or Hebrew Bible was written mostly in an ancient form of Hebrew. It's a very difficult language. There are no vowels in the written form of it. It's only consonants. So there was even a guessing game in some respects.
I admit that there are still some hard parts to understand, but the more we study the original languages, the more the different disciplines that feed into Bible study, like the historians and archaeology and scientists, and they find out more, and we fit it together all the time, believing this is God's perspective on history, on humanity, on himself. And then you begin to find what some call the full-orbed message of truth, finding the whole picture.
Finding the whole picture can be difficult when you read some of the ancient laws. For instance, what do laws regarding animal sacrifice and sexual practice and other aspects of tribal life in biblical times have to do with the 21st century? What about the requirement of an annual goat banishment to cleanse from sin? Can we really be expected to take the Bible seriously?
I take the Bible seriously, but I don't always take it literally with some of these laws. I want to understand what they meant to the people who first heard them and what God intended for those laws to do. Another example would be an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That meant something in a society with tribal groups. We know this archaeologically about tribal groups. And the law was serious. If somebody took a tooth out of your tribal group, you needed to take a tooth out of their group. It was the law to do it, but no more than a tooth. Otherwise, you get this Hatfields and McCoys kind of development. So in a tribal group, that meant something. But by the time we get to the New Testament, Jesus talks about, you have heard an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I tell you, if someone strikes you on one cheek, turn the other cheek. So society had changed. A law that was meant to preserve tribal groups is no longer useful.
For me, that asking all these questions, pressing all these historical issues, ultimately brought me back to a realization that there are things clearly that I don't understand, but that's what God told Job, that you're too small and puny to understand all of this. You weren't even around when I created this whole thing. And in a way, that's not a satisfying answer, but ultimately I think that's sometimes what we're left with, and that's what faith really is.
I find myself addicted to this book now. I just want to find out more. I just hunger to find out the picture of God that He wants me to have.
As you can see, the Bible is a controversial book. Marriages have been united by it, countries have been divided by it. But is it true? Is it historically accurate? What does recent archaeological evidence tell us? We'll find out when we come back.
I Learn English, you can also on Hello Channel.
The Madaba Plains Project is an archaeological site covering a vast area in central Jordan. 3 locations within that site have received particular attention: Tal Hisban, Tal Jalul, and Tal Alumeri. For the last 30 years, archaeologists Doug Clark and Larry Garrity have led expeditions to this site.
It began in the late 60s with a man, Dr. Siegfried Horn, who actually was a mentor for a number of us who continue work there. And it began at a site called Heshbon, shows up in a number of places in the Old Testament. And then when excavations were completed there after 5 seasons, we moved to a couple of other places, but still in the plains, the Madaba Plains. They're just south of the capital city of Amman, Jordan.
At Heshbon, the site we began with, we found a huge reservoir up near the top of the mound that was built in the 10th century BC. And it almost certainly is the pools of Heshbon mentioned in the Song of Solomon in the Bible, where he's describing his beloved, and he says, "Your eyes are like the pools at Heshbon by the gate of Bat Rabim." And so if these pools are full of water sparkling in the sunlight, you can see how they would be an apt simile for, somebody's eyes.
In the past 30 years, actually 50 years, but more recently, there have been extraordinary finds in the Holy Land, in particular, of sites, buildings, temples, living places that have a great deal to do with the events in the Bible.
But not all the archaeological evidence we have supports a biblical story. For example, to date, no one has found solid evidence that the wall surrounding the city of Jericho came down just as the Bible describes. And to date, there's a problem with the story that the children of Israel conquered another city shortly after the Exodus from Egypt. That city was Heshbon.
Heshbon really doesn't date back to when we would date the Exodus. There are 2 dates for the Exodus. Some people would suggest the 15th century BC, the 1400s. Others would say the 1200s. Either way you go with that, the town of Heshbon wasn't quite there yet. And so maybe it was somewhere else. And there was a movement of peoples that ended up planting it where we now find what we find. What I think we have to do is recognize that the biblical stories somehow begin with a historical event. Something happened. These things don't just come out of nowhere.
And in the last 50 years, there have been all kinds of digs that have brought to light things that support the historicity of the Bible. The Dead Sea Scrolls being one of the most famous. These were found just after World War II, and as a result of those finds, we now have manuscripts for the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, that go back before the time of Jesus even. So every year there are finds that are made that are important to the establishing of the Bible as a very historically important and accurate book.
Very often we have a sense, I think a lot of people grow up with the idea that the Bible happened in Never Never Land, that it didn't really happen. It's like the Greek myths or the legends of King Arthur. But if you go back and look at history, you find a lot of clear connections and clear parallels between events in the Bible and recorded history.
One thing history makes clear is that life in Bible times was nothing like life in Never Never Land. People struggled against the elements. Lice, wild animals, drought, starvation. Life was hard, and death was an ever-present reality.
If your children survived until their teen years, you were fortunate. Life expectancy, 35, that's doing well. We don't think in those terms. And when we look back at the biblical passages and we say, those people complained a lot, Moses, why are you taking us out here? We're out of water. We need some food. The truth of the matter is they were out of food. They were out of water. They were most of the time. It was hard to live. These people died young. They worked hard. They had as many children as they could. That was their labor force. This was a subsistence economy, by which I mean that people grew what they could eat. There was not a lot of trading back and forth. So when you know those kinds of things, I think we end up having a bit more sympathy for some of these people in Bible times. And I think we can understand and appreciate the biblical passages better.
Of all the questions that I have asked and that people have asked me over the years that I've been working and thinking about this book, nobody's really asked me what the future of the Bible is. But I think it's survived 4,000 years, 2,000 years in the case of the New Testament. So its future is probably secure.
When we come back, the religion editor of U.S. News and World Report explores some of the thorniest aspects of current debates about the Bible. What he says might surprise you.
Children can learn English by watching Hello Channel.
I'm talking to journalist Jeffrey Sheeler, religion editor of U.S. News and World Report, and author of this fascinating book, Is the Bible True? In fact, even more fascinating, the subtitle, How Modern Debates and Discoveries Affirm the Essence of Scriptures. Welcome, Jeffrey. Glad to have you on The Evidence.
Thank you, Dwight.
I want to move right to this title. Is the Bible true? Is this even the question to ask if the Bible is a book of faith and not a book of history?
You know, if the Bible's history could be proven to be false, then that would cast a very major shadow over the Bible's theological claims. Now, you can't prove the theological claims as a historian, but you can substantiate the history. Therefore, the Bible creates a historical context that is firm and sound that underlies the theological claims.
So what are some of the ways, then, that you or somebody sets out to prove the veracity of biblical history?
Well, you do what a good journalist would do, or a good historian. You ask questions, you examine the sources. Who are the sources? How authoritative are they? How reliable are they? You look for physical evidence. You look for documentary evidence.
Are there pieces
there's a tremendous amount of evidence of that nature. There's a tremendous amount. Archaeologists during this last century have uncovered a wealth of information. Inscriptions, artifacts, ruins, architectural ruins that really do create a good, sound picture.
Do you mean now when you say they've found actual evidence, you're talking about parallel events to biblical history or actual verification of events recorded in Scripture?
Well, both, really. We have evidence that certainly undergirds the context, the historical context of many of the stories of the Bible, setting those stories then in a real, recoverable, provable historical context. But we also, in some cases, have dramatic corroboration of the actual episodes.
What's dramatic?
Well, one, for example, if you look at the ancient Assyrian inscriptions from the king of Assyria, King Sennacherib, he wrote about his military exploits, his invasion of Judah. Talks about invading Judah, laying siege to Jerusalem, laying siege to Lachish. And when you read about this in the annals of Sennacherib, and then you pick up the book of 2 Kings in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, it is an exact parallel. It is a parallel description. I mean, not word for word, but I mean that clearly they're talking about the same thing, and they go together. Now that, to me, is dramatic corroboration of biblical history. Now there's also indirect corroboration that is also dramatic.
Such as?
About 7 years ago, in Upper Galilee, some archaeologists discovered a stone that they turned it over and it had inscription on it. This inscription was found in a wall. They determined that this inscription was written by Syrians, not Assyrians, but Syrians, during the time of the divided kingdom, kingdom of Judah, kingdom of Israel. In this inscription, it mentions two leaders who were defeated by the Syrians. They are the king of Israel and the house of David. Now, that mention of David was a historical bombshell because that was the first time that the name of David had been discovered outside of the text of the Bible itself.
Prior to that, no verification that David, in fact, was an historical figure.
And skeptics like to jump on that fact to make the argument that David was a legend, that he was made up by priests during the exile to sort of create a noble history for this poor exiled nation, give them something patriotic around which to rally. Now they could no longer make that argument because here was an inscription written, inscribed within 100 years of the time of David, not by Hebrew scribes or priests, but by an enemy of Israel, celebrating their victory over Israel and the house of David. That was dramatic corroboration, certainly not of all of the stories of David, but certainly that now we know that David was a true historical figure.
And then the discovery, what, about 40, 50 years ago, Dead Sea Scrolls. That actually ends up being, according to your book, a fairly seminal discovery in terms of verifying the authenticity. Why?
Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls, which of course were the most dramatic and important archaeological discovery of the 20th century, really do two things in regards to the Bible. The scrolls contained within those 800 or so documents, almost half of them, nearly half of them, were biblical texts.
Straight out of the corpus.
They were scrolls that made up the Hebrew Bible. Every book of the Hebrew Bible except the book of Esther was found within the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Right?
And in many cases there were numerous copies of each book. When scholars were able to examine those biblical texts, they found many things, but the most dramatic and important thing that they found was how remarkably well preserved the Hebrew Bible has traveled these last 2,000 years. In other words, while some scholars had made the case that the Bible probably was altered, particularly in the first Christian centuries, now we suddenly had texts that went back to the turn of the era, biblical texts. And when we look at those texts, we see that there were virtually no major changes from that day to this day in the text of the Hebrew Bible. That was an important corroboration of the preservation of the integrity of the Hebrew Bible.
So I walk into a bookstore. You've convinced me, Jeffrey. I need to check this book out. And I'm reading the book. It is possible that if there is a God, I could interface, I could connect somehow to the book.
Well, that has been the experience of millions of people for 2,000 years. That is what has made the Bible what it is. The fact that it continues to be a bestseller. It's not because of the pictures. It's not because of the snazzy storyline. It's because of how it speaks to people, how it resonates to them personally, and how it reveals for them the existence of the God of Israel, who is active in history, redeeming history, and is communicating. That is what believers have believed the Bible to be.
Jeffrey Sheeler, fascinating book, Is the Bible True? Delighted to have you on The Evidence. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So what do you think? What do you think about the Bible? Tell us. Visit our website. You can find us at www.theevidence.org. That's O-R-G. I'll be back in just a moment with what I think right after this.
My name is Alan, and you're watching Hello Channel.
Moses leading the children of Israel out of Egypt, Daniel in the fall of Babylon, Jesus in the temple at Jerusalem. These are Bible stories that many of us have learned in childhood. And let's face it, these stories often seem less and less credible as we get older. They seem removed from the real world. But remarkably enough, archaeologists unearthing clay jars and Assyrian inscriptions and temple pillars have validated those very same stories. They've shown us how biblical records fit in time and place. They've dug up artifacts that confirm details in those same narratives. In other words, archaeology has helped to turn what many critics assumed were mere legends into history. I think that's something unique about the Bible. Some scholars, in fact, have concluded that no other document intertwines stories of God's intervention with facts of history so well. And I find that a wonderfully hopeful phenomenon, because it suggests to me that God can indeed be active in my history, in my life. It suggests that God's plans can intertwine with my challenges and problems and longings. After all, isn't that the bottom line? Don't we all hope there's a word, a message, a voice that can guide us now and here? What archaeology has helped to show us is that the Bible is a guide with the greatest of credentials. That's what I think. I'm Dwight Nelson. Join us next time for more of The Evidence.
When I first heard that Tariq was killed and shot, it felt like a nuclear bomb had exploded inside of my body, and that I was blown into millions of pieces that could never, ever come back together. I know that my life had changed and changed forever.
On the night of January 21st, 1995, 20-year-old Tariq Khamisa was murdered by 14-year-old Tony Hicks in North Park, a suburb of San Diego, California. Tariq's father, a Muslim, and Tony's grandfather, a Christian, were forced together by this crime. Could anything good come out of the tragic story of Tony Hicks and Tariq Khamisa?
He was an incredibly kind person and a very loving person, and also very humorous. I remember Tariq could crack a joke in the most tense and most serious environment and kind of loosen it up.
What I loved most about my brother was his big heart, his strong commitment to family and friends, his sense of humor. He was hilarious, and also his wisdom. He was an old soul in a young body and always had great advice and very positive, free-spirited person.
Age 20, in college and engaged to be married, Tariq Khamisa had grown up with a stable family and strong religious values. By contrast, Tony Hicks, age 14, had spent most of his life in the gang-dominated neighborhoods of South Central Los Angeles.
My grandson's life was fairly typical of a child who was born to a teenager. She had no experience in parenting, so she relied a great deal on my mom for assistance, her mother for assistance, me for assistance. Tony didn't have a relationship with his dad, or to the extent that he did, his relationship with his dad was filled with heavy criticism and abuse.
Along with the abuse he received from his father, Tony witnessed violence on the street at a very young age.
He had the horrific experience of witnessing the aftermath of one of his teenage cousins being murdered in a gang shooting. Tony arrived on the scene just as the medical examiners were removing the bullet-riddled body of his favorite cousin from this car in which he was murdered. That impacted him severely.
Tony's mom decided to send him to San Diego to live with his grandfather. For 5 years, Ples acted as a father to Tony, reading to him, playing ball with him, caring for his needs. But when Tony turned 14, he began to rebel under his grandfather's strict rules. On January 21st, 1995, he left his grandfather a note. "Daddy, I've run away. Love, Tony."
It was very much a jolt, because I knew that Tony was angry. And when I found the note, the only thing I could do was my immediate response was to go out and try to find Tony. But then I called a friend of mine who recommended that I not do that, and that I just call the police and report Tony as a runaway, and I did that.
Tony ran away to join a new family, a gang. Antoine Pittman, the gang's 18-year-old leader, gave Tony a new name, Bones. Antoine, 2 other boys, and Tony, as the newly christened Bones, spent the day smoking pot, drinking alcohol, and partying. That evening they got hungry, but they had no money. So they decided to order pizzas and have them delivered to a fake address, then rip off the delivery guy. At 9:30 p.m., they called DeMille's restaurant. Tariq Khamisa, about to call it a night, was asked to take one more order.
Tariq went to deliver the pizza. He knocked on 4 doors. It was a small complex. And while he was knocking, the gang had gone around his car and also across the street. They asked him for the pizza, and he said no. and the 18-year-old told Bones, "Bust him, Bones."
And at the point that he shot Tariq and his friends ran off, he was standing there for milliseconds, understanding that the guy he shot was dying. He knew he had done the worst thing he could ever do. He really wanted to help Tariq. I mean, the person that he is wanted to help this person he had just shot. And he could hear in the distance his friends telling him, "Run, run, run. Don't drop the gun."
While waiting for word on his grandson's whereabouts, Ples Felix saw a news flash about a young pizza delivery man shot and killed in North Park.
And at the time that I saw that, it washed a very, very bad feeling all over me, because I immediately sensed that Tony was out in the street somewhere. I didn't know where he was. And here, this evening, there's a murder that took place in North Park. It was just very, very bad foreboding for me.
The story of a 14-year-old boy running away to join a gang and then shooting a young pizza delivery man is newsworthy, but unfortunately not unique. This story, however, takes a highly unusual turn. We'll find out what happened next when we come back.
I was hunched over on the telephone here in my kitchen, and that I literally left my body, and my life drained out of me, from the head downwards to the feet, because the pain is so excruciating, you cannot really be in your body. And I remember leaving my body and going into the loving arms of my Maker, loving arms of God.
Looking for a brighter future? Learn English and make it happen on Hello Channel.
On Saturday night, January 21st, 1995, 14-year-old Tony Hicks shot and killed 20-year-old Tariq Khamisa in the course of stealing 2 pizzas. At 8 on Sunday morning, Azim Khamisa, Tariq's father, got a message from Sergeant Lambert to call the San Diego Police Department.
And they told me that Tariq was shot and killed. Of course, my mind didn't accept that. And the first thing I thought, they must have made a mistake. So I frantically said goodbye and called his number. And Jennifer was on the other line, and she couldn't say anything. She was crying and totally out of it. At which point I knew that it was true.
Kit Goldman and her husband were there shortly after Azim got the news.
I've never seen a human being shattered, as disintegrated as Azim and subsequently his family was as they began to arrive. He was a person completely apart, is the only way I can put it. It was amazing to me that he was walking around because he was in pieces.
Azim Khamisa now had the task of telling Tariq's mother her only son had been murdered.
And I told her in broken words as much as I could, in shock of what had happened. And my recollection is that she let out a shriek and collapsed to the floor. And I can still hear that, as I say, in my inner ear. The next call was to my mother and my daughter. My daughter was visiting my mother.
We arrived at my dad's house, and I walked in the door, and when I saw my dad, just something overcame me, and I collapsed again on the floor. I was trying to be strong from, all the way here for my mom, because I needed to be strong for her. But seeing my dad and seeing Jennifer, my brother's fiance, was here as well, seeing the both of them was just overwhelming for me. And we were all here and started praying. All we could do was start praying for strength.
While Tariq Khamisa's family grieved, Ples Felix received a different kind of phone call from the police.
And I was notified by the detective that Tony was no longer considered a runaway, but he was a prime suspect in the murder of Tariq Khamisa. Well, that foreboding that I had sensed the Saturday night upon seeing the newsreel just kind of came home to me. And I was hit with a lot of deep emotion, extreme disappointment. And I began automatically to clarify my grieving for Tariq Kamisa and his family, as I knew that Tariq was gone and his family had to do the best they could to address that in their grieving. But I knew that Tony's life would just begin to be on a path that none of us can anticipate, and that ultimately he would end up in the prison system.
Tony Hicks was the first juvenile to be tried as an adult under a newly passed California law. On June 11, 1995, Tony appeared before Superior Court Judge Joan Weber.
I'm admitting, sir, that on that date you did in fact shoot and kill Mr. Kamisa during the attempted commission of a robbery. Is that correct?
Yes. I did not participate in the trial. I did not go to court. My attitude about the kids was different in terms of what the society wanted.
I have a lot of problems in my life. Over the last year while I've been in juvenile hall, I've thought about my problems. I wish I didn't have the type of life I had. I wish I had a relationship with my father. I think about the warning that my grandfather gave me.
This kid made a mistake when he shot and killed Tariq Kamisa, but he's basically a good person.
I'm very sorry for what I've done. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak.
Tony Hicks was sentenced to 25 years to life in an adult prison. He must serve 20 years before he's eligible for parole.
It's a difficult thing for a father. Because as a father, you know, it's your job to make the world safe and secure for your children. There's a big sense of failure when you lose a child, because you feel that you've failed your responsibility.
The story doesn't end here. Ples Felix and Azim Kamisa began working together to bring something good, something godlike, out of their painful memories. We'll learn about what they're doing when we meet both Ples and Azim here in the studio after this.
Hello.
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 Azim Kamisa is the father of Tariq Kamisa, who was shot and killed by Tony Hicks. Tony Hicks is the grandson of Ples Felix. Ples and Azim, delighted to have you on the evidence. The last we hear, just a moment ago, we're coming up to Tony's sentencing. But before Tony is sentenced, you meet. How did that meeting turn out, Azim?
Well, I asked for the meeting. I had made a decision to start a foundation in memory of my son, Tariq Kamisa Foundation. And I asked the deputy district attorney to set up a meeting. And I was under the impression that I was going to meet with the public defender that defended Tony. Because he wanted to know why I wanted to meet Ples. When I arrived there with the deputy DA and another member of the foundation, Mike Reynolds, Ples was already there.
You walk into the room and Ples is there.
Ples is already there.
What was that moment like?
And it took me by surprise. And I stopped, but then I continued. And I was introduced to Ples by Peter. And I opened the conversation. And I told Ples that I wanted him to know that I didn't feel any animosity towards him.
Ples, your reaction?
Well, for me, this was an answer to my prayer. Because as soon as I knew that Tony was responsible for Tariq's death, I began to pray and ask for an opportunity to meet Tariq's family. So meeting Azim and shaking his hand and expressing my condolences and sympathies and letting him know that I was keeping his family in my daily prayers and meditations, and that I wanted to make myself available in any way I could to assist him and his family with their loss.
In fact, you met the whole family. What was it, a week or two
Well,
later?
yeah. I invited Ples to my house. We had our second meeting for the foundation about a week after I'd met him. And at the second meeting, my entire family was there. My father was there. Tariq's mother was there. My daughter was there. My sister was there. And my mom was there. And we had 50 other guests. And Ples came. And I think it took a lot of courage on his part to come to my house and meet all the Khamisas, but also to talk in front of 50 people. And he committed to help any which way he could. And that was 6 years ago, and as you see, we're still together, working together.
How would you describe the passion of your foundation?
Well, the goal of the foundation is to stop children from killing children.
Okay.
That they would choose a different path than Tony did. We are a prevention program, and I'm pleased to tell you our results are extremely exemplary.
Good.
We're shifting attitudes that lead to revenge.
Are you going into
guns, gangs,
schools,
and
you're going
violence.
into public schools, sitting down with the kids, or how's that work?
What they do in this program is they see a very powerful video.
Is this where Tony's speech is played?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And we've also reenacted the murder scene.
Oh, you have?
So it's a powerful video.
Okay.
It starts there. And then I get up and talk about the impact this tragedy had on me and my family. And Ples gets up and speaks about the impact this tragedy has on his life and his family. And then we have a male panelist and a female panelist that were both gang members, but now doing good work.
Let me ask you, man, was justice served in Tony's sentence?
Yes. You know, there was never a real trial. When the trial finally arrived, Tony pled guilty and took responsibility for taking my son's life. And he gave a very remorseful, emotional speech where he begs for God's forgiveness and my forgiveness.
Were you able to forgive him when he asked for that?
I had already forgiven him prior to that because I'd already met Ples and the foundation was already going.
Okay.
But it meant a lot to me that he did ask for it.
Ples, justice was served in the sentencing of your grandson?
I would have to say that justice was served with respect to Tony's taking responsibility for what he did, for seeking the forgiveness of those that he harmed, and to commit himself to being a better person. However, I don't agree that kids, 14 years old, should be thrown into an adult prison.
And I endorse that. I was not in favor
of
children at 14 being tried as adults. Now my feeling is it takes 16 to drive a car, 18 to vote, and 21 to have a drink. How is a 14-year-old an adult?
Now, gentlemen, Muslim, Christian, how's that work?
Well,
easily.
Yeah.
I like that answer.
Easily.
Yeah.
Easily how?
I think is that the belief systems may be different, but when spiritual people meet together, that commonness is always there. It's like Ples and I have never had a challenge in terms of our spiritual resonance. It has been there from day one, and if anything, is resonating even at a higher frequency.
Ples?
And I say it's easy because basically, when you get right down to it, we really have to rely on each other as human beings. We really do. In our neighborhoods, schools, and our communities, the best work we do is the work we do together, with one another, for one another. The best work we can ever aspire to do is working together on behalf of our children, because they're going to grow up having learned from us. And we want to make sure they got good habits, and a great portion of those habits having to do with the willingness to work with people who may not think like you do, who may not speak like you do, but basically have the same goal in mind, some good, positive, productive outcome, and certainly on behalf of children.
One last question, gentlemen. Our nation has been through an horrific experience, you know. What would you say to your fellow Americans?
Well, you're right. There are very difficult days ahead. There's a lot of healing to be done. And I really wish there was a Muslim Nelson Mandela right now that could stand up and say that these people that create these heinous acts are not Muslims. And I'm pretty mad that they've done this to my country and hijacked my faith.
Ples?
For me, what's important is that we do everything we can to support the healing. And the healing begins with thinking in loving terms. First with the family members and people that we're close to, and spreading that love out to people that we don't even know, but making ourselves available in a compassionate, loving way, and certainly in a forgiving way, because forgiveness is really a major step towards redemption as well as healing. And for healing to take place, there has to be love, there has to be compassion, and there has to be forgiveness.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Well put. Ples, Nazim, thank you for being with us here at The Evidence.
Thank you for having us.
For more information on Ples and Nazim and the work they're doing with their foundation to stop the violence between kids, check out our website. It's one word, theevidence.org, O-R-G. I'll be back in just a moment.
Hello, my name is Javier. I learned English. So can you. Watch Hello Channel.
Ples Felix's grandson shot and killed Azim Khamisa's son over a couple of pizzas. You and I might have expected the two men to hate each other, or at least have nothing more to do with each other as they attempted to move on with their lives. But Ples and Azim, a Christian and a Muslim, overcame their differences and joined together to help kids stop killing kids. They brought something good out of the evil they both suffered. Why is that? In a world where it's more natural to accept a bank error in your favor than to call and correct it, what makes Ples and Azim so extraordinary? Has the world been mysteriously infused by goodness? And does that point to God? I believe it does. I think the existence of goodness is evidence for the existence of God. A God who works in us to behave against our natural tendency. A God who brings forgiveness in place of revenge. I agree with Ples and Azim. There is evidence for God in the goodness they have found in the midst of their sorrow. I'm Dwight Nelson. Join us next time for more of The Evidence. U.S. News & World Report recently conducted a survey on prayer. In this survey, 68% of Christians, 37% of Jews, and 92% of Muslims reported praying more than once a day. The same survey also asked how many of these prayers were answered. Fascinating. Only 28% of Christians, 13% of Jews, and 30% of Muslims said their prayers were always answered. Isn't God powerful enough to answer all my prayers? And if He is, why doesn't He? In just a moment, we'll talk to best-selling author of numerous books on prayer, Stormy Omartian. I'm Dwight Nelson, and welcome to The Evidence. Stormy Omartian's books on prayer have sold more than 6 million copies. She's a well-known public speaker, a popular author, and a songwriter. Stormy, we're delighted that you're joining us today from your home in Nashville.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Stormy, in your book, and I have it right here, you talk about times when you've prayed for healing and you admit you weren't healed. Those must have been very discouraging times. How did you handle all of that?
Well, one specific time where I wasn't healed, and not only wasn't healed, but I almost died, and I was sick for about 6 months, and we kept praying. My husband and I kept praying for healing. We didn't know what was wrong with me, and the doctors couldn't find anything, and I was in the emergency hospital so many times, and I could never find anything, and I never, you know, got healed. And finally my appendix ruptured, and I almost died, and they still couldn't find what was wrong with me for about 8 hours before they operated. But during that time, you know, you wonder, why doesn't God heal me? I mean, why didn't he hear me? You know, and I trust God enough to know that when I pray, I'm not telling him what to do. You know, I'm not just giving him a list and telling him what to do. I'm, you know, sharing my heart and sharing my longings and my needs. And if he doesn't answer in the way I want him to, then I know that he has a purpose for it.
You suggest that sometimes God may be holding off on answering our prayers. Why would he do that, especially when we're praying for something so important?
Well, you know, I know how hard it is when prayer is not answered. It's especially something that's so important to you. It's just agonizing, and it makes us angry and sad and frustrated and all those things. But I believe that God has a deep purpose in that, and that sometimes he delays the answer to our prayers a certain amount of time. Sometimes he probably has to accomplish a certain amount of things before he answers it, but I think often is that he wants to get our attention. He wants our attention to be totally focused on him, and he wants us to depend on him. He's really almost, in a way, testing our faith. Will we continue to have faith? Will we continue to believe in him? Will we continue to trust in him? Will we continue to depend on him and until we see the answers to our prayers? So he'll let us go so often until just all hope is gone, until we know there's no way that this could happen unless God does it. And he has done that so often in my life, where I'll pray for something, and there's no other way that it could have happened other than God answered that prayer. So I can never get too cocky and thinking, well, I did it myself, or things just turned out that way, or what a coincidence, you know, this all worked out. It's where I know that God did it, and I think that's often why he delays in answering our prayers.
And why do people sometimes have trouble recognizing the answers to their prayers?
You know, so often we pray for something, and we pray specifically. This is what we want God to do. We want him to answer in this way, and God answers in his way, and he answers in his timing. And so often we don't recognize the answers to our own prayers because they're not answered the way we prayed them. You know, we're thinking that he's not listening, and here he's answered it in another way. You know, and there's so many examples of that in my own life. I remember thinking how I really would love to live in a place where the air was clear and there wasn't as much crime and all of these things, and where I thought would be a better place to raise my kids, and I had all of these requests for God about that, and God ended up moving us from one state to another, and at the time I was very ungrateful about that. I didn't want to move, you know. I just wanted God to clear up the air where I was, and I wanted him to take away all the crime, you know. But he moved me to another place where the air was clear and there was no crime, and I did not recognize the answers to my own prayers. And so here I'm grumbling and complaining. I'm surprised I didn't get struck with lightning at the time, because I was so grumbling about it and saying, God, why did you take me here? I don't want to be here. And then realizing later that God was answering my prayers. So many prayers, not just those, so many prayers that I had prayed.
You say that praise is the prayer that changes everything. What do you mean by that phrase?
Well, my definition of prayer is communicating with God. And the ultimate communication with God is praise, because it's pure in that it takes the focus entirely off of ourselves and places it entirely upon God. And when you do that, when you place your entire focus on God in worship and praise, his presence comes to dwell with you. And it says in the Bible that he inhabits the praises of his people, which is so exciting, because that means his presence is there every time you worship him. And when you're in the presence of God, I'm telling you, things change. Your mind changes, your attitude, your circumstances, your heart, all of those things begin to change. And the reason for that is, as you praise him, he pours of himself into you. It's like a funnel, you know, it's like this open funnel, and you open up to God in that way, in that pure praise and worship, and he pours his love and his peace and his joy, all of the aspects of him into your life. And that's why things begin to change in your life. The more you praise God, the more things change. And that's why praise is the prayer that changes everything.
Stormy, thanks so much for taking the time to share with us on The Evidence. God bless you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
In the movie Bruce Almighty, God, who is played by Morgan Freeman, makes the point that most people don't know what they really want when they pray. He shows how a yes answer to a prayer can really mess up a person's life. And when Jim Carrey uses his newfound God powers to answer yes to everyone's prayers, it leads to chaos and riots in the streets. The movie is fiction, of course, but it raises an interesting point. If God answered all of your prayers with a yes, would you have what you really want? Stay with us.
Looking for a brighter future? Learn English and make it happen on Hello Channel.
Welcome back. Mike Tucker, a chaplain who has worked in both hospitals and hospices, a pastor and the executive producer of this show, now joins me. Also joining us is Andrea Bartoli, professor of international conflict resolution at Columbia University and a member of the community of San Egidio, centered in Rome, Italy.
Yes.
Gentlemen, good to have you both. You know we're thinking prayer. Our conversation is prayer. So let me say that I have this friend. I pray for her. She has cancer. I ask God, please heal her. She dies. What's happening? My prayers obviously are a failure.
They're
Andrea?
not a failure.
They're not a failure.
They're not a failure. First of all, because if you are calling that person a friend, that's coming from God. So I think that to have somebody praying for a friend is already a gift of life that many do not have. Loneliness is a terrible sickness of these days, and prayer is actually a moment in which we are together in a ways that is difficult for many to understand. Death is a passage, and that friend of yours was actually probably blessed of having somebody close, somebody that was able to think beyond what we can see, the body alone, or what we can see as material things.
Now, Mike, as a chaplain, you have lived and moved in the realm of death. Have you prayed for people?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I had a struggle with this, to tell you the truth, when I worked as a pastor and as a chaplain in particular. I've attended probably 500 deaths. 400 of those within a span of 4 to 5 years when I was working as a chaplain. And it seemed to me that every time they called me, it was for someone who was dying, and I would pray for them and they would die. And I began to wonder, what is up with this? I mean, is this just a formality that we're going through? Finally, when I went back to pastoral work, there was a 16-year-old girl who came down with viral spinal meningitis.
Wow.
Doctors gave her a 15% chance to live 2 hours, a 0% chance to live the night. I went in and captain gowned up and had a prayer for her and prayed for healing. Her classmates were in the chapel of the hospital praying for her as well. After I prayed for her, I went to tell the young people to let them know that maybe, you know, we need to get ready for this girl's death, and they wouldn't hear of it. They prayed all night long. 6 weeks later, that girl walked out of the hospital.
Incredible.
And I all of a sudden had to reassess my understanding of prayer. What I've come to know through that process is that prayer, first and foremost, is an opportunity to seek the face of God. It is not so much a name it, claim it kind of a deal. It's not where I'm
demanding
going to,
that I need this gift and I need it now.
Although we can ask for things, but the primary purpose of prayer is to know God, to know His will, and to do His will in your life. That's the purpose. And when I pray and I know God better, or I know His will better, and I'm able to do that will, my prayer has been answered. Whether or not I've gotten the specific thing that I've asked for or not is not really the issue. Do I know God better, and can I do His will now?
And I do believe that there is a reduction when we equate prayer with demanding things.
Yes.
I think that prayer is much more than that. It's a moment in which we open up to life, we open up to God, we open up to something we do not know necessarily. And I think it's important not to force prayer into something that we control, that we know exactly what we think we want.
You take a classic illustration, Mel Gibson's global hit movie, The Passion of the Christ. the film actually opens, as you men remember, with Christ, with this Jesus of Nazareth in the Garden of Gethsemane, agonizing for something, and yet the irony is, or the enigma, what he asked for actually doesn't come to pass. So the skeptics, you're questioning Andrea.
No, I'm just responding that what he's asking doesn't come to pass. In Jesus' terms, actually what he wanted was to have God's will done, not what he wanted. So in a way, there is an interesting paradox in Jesus' life, which is clearly crucial to the experience of faith, because...
So apparently your own will, for an individual praying as Jesus was, your own will may not necessarily be the same as the will of God, and you can clash. You can be a saint, you can be a person in perfection and still have a will that may be counter if it's allowed to progress to the want of God.
Yeah, when I look at my 2-year-old child who is trying to get the book, you know, he may want to have the book, but may not get the book the right way that I would probably suggest him to get it. And I think that we have too much of a sense of opposition when we think about my will and God's will. I think that on the contrary, that there is an expectation of God that in growing in the understanding, we will actually find the harmony that is momentarily lost.
And in fact, the model prayer, gentlemen, that Jesus taught, we call it the Lord's Prayer. Something in there, isn't there, about your will be done?
Sure.
What does it mean to submit to the will of someone outside of yourself?
What it means is that as a creature such as myself, I may think that I want something, but it may not be the best thing either for me or for my family or for the greater plan, the world. It might not be the best thing, but God knows what the best thing is. And if I am truly going to live according to His will, and if I'm going to be His follower, then I have to ask that my leader's will take supremacy over my will, because His will is always best. That was the prayer of Jesus at Gethsemane. He said, I don't want to go through this. I don't want to face this. But more importantly, I want your will to be done, and that is that man be reconciled to myself. And so I'm willing to put my will aside and accept yours.
Hold that thought with a pause button. We want to find out what happened when a group of high school students took that idea to heart, and we'll find out right after this.
Paola.
Sí, mamá.
Ven acá, por favor.
I don't know how my mom knew, but I guess moms always know. I wasn't being very nice to one of the girls at school. I knew it was wrong. I knew I wasn't supposed to be mean. I guess I didn't think it was a big deal. But in one sentence, my mom helped me understand. She said, "Mija, you need to treat others the way you want to be treated." I thought about that a lot. I still do.
Life's most important lessons are best learned in the home. A message from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Learn English and have fun on Hello Channel.
We're talking about prayer in this episode of The Evidence. I'm here with Mike Tucker and Andrea Bartoli, the American representative at a most unusual community headquartered in Rome, Italy, San Angerio, the community of San Angerio. What's that community about?
The community of Sant'Egidio started in Rome in 1968 by the initiative of a young man who was 18, a high school student, read the gospel, gathered a few friends, and started a life of prayer, service, and friendship. Now is 60,000 people strong around the world, all living this simple life of prayer, service, and...
sorry for interrupting. Are they all young, like 18, 19, 20-year-olds?
Well, many of us grew up. I was 13 when I joined, but I'm definitely older now.
Yeah, okay.
But you have people who are 84. In New York, we have a wonderful lady, Margie, who is 84 years old and is a member of the community.
Okay.
All age, all race, all countries, and it's just based on prayer.
I was going to say, what's the purpose of the community? What do you do?
We just try to live the gospel. We do believe that the gospel is given to us as a whole, and that in prayer, friendship, and service, we can try to live by it, to try to make our life a gospel, a good news today.
I like that. Prayer, friendship, and service. Yeah, Mike, is this something of your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Who was it? It was Oswald Chamber who said that prayer does not prepare us for some greater work. Prayer is the greater work. Basically, the work of Christians is to pray. It is to be together, to love one another, to love those around us, to minister to their needs, but also to pray, because it's through prayer that we discover who God is, we discover what His will is, and a very important part of His will is that we meet the needs of one another, that we respond to each other in love. So absolutely, this is the kingdom of God on earth.
Now, Andrea, you've been involved in some major hotspots on this earth as a negotiator, as a peacemaker.
Sure, but that actually happened through the community.
Through your community. Yeah. So prayer is a part of your negotiating strategy?
Well, it's more than that. I would say that prayer is the source of this desire for peace that is frequently lost in people's loneliness and fear. And in prayer, we find the source of that peace that is given to us. And it's very important to remember that, because very often we believe that peace is the product of a political settlement or something that has to do with our own decision. And we do believe that peace is actually received. Peace be with you is the word that is given to the disciples. And very often we do not pray enough and we do not receive peace enough. And prayer is perceived as this place in which we demand things instead of receiving things. And I think that actually, for Sant'Egidio, there is no doubt that prayer is this moment in which a vocation is given, a meaning is given, a sense of dream is given, and peace is part of it.
So, gentlemen, I'm listening to you, and you have said prayer is not just about getting and receiving. Prayer is also about responding and acting in the human journey. So let's say I'm the skeptic, and I'm listening to you, and I'm saying, hey, very interesting. And Stormy was on just a moment ago, and so we're talking to Stormy about answered prayers. So as a skeptic, I'm thinking, you know, maybe I could try this reaching out to God. What would you say to me to get me on this journey of moving into the experience of prayer?
I'd say, first of all, keep it simple. Don't try to make prayer something very complicated. Attempt to talk to God just like you and I are talking to one another. Talk to Him as you would talk to a friend, and tell Him the truth. Tell Him what's on your heart. Tell Him what you need, what you desire, and the fact that you're a little bit skeptical about this. I would start with that.
No fancy language. I mean, we hear people who say thee and thou.
Yeah,
and
the old King
that.
James English. No, we need to talk to God in the language that we're comfortable with, whatever that language might be.
Right.
And truthfully, if you really don't have any words for prayer, if you don't even know where to start, a wonderful place to do that is to simply get a modern translation of the book of Psalms. And pray those words from the Psalms as though they were your own words.
Those ancient prayers.
Those ancient prayers, because they were written as prayers. They were songs and they were also prayers, sometimes sung by the entire congregation as an act of worship. So take those prayers, change personal pronouns, and pray those. And you will find something interesting happening. Not only will you find yourself learning the process of prayer, but you will also discover something of God's will in those ancient prayers.
Andrea, you would add something to that.
Well, I would say take your heart seriously.
Take your heart seriously. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that God is within. I think that Jesus is very clear that the kingdom is within. And I think that you need to believe that God is speaking to you.
So does God draw me here? Is there some sort of reciprocal movement?
Absolutely. It was Eugene H. Peterson who said, prayer is answering language. So God speaks to us first. He puts it in our heart to pray. It's the kingdom of God within you, what you were talking about. He puts it in my heart, even before I believed in Him, even before I wanted to know Him. He put it in my heart to pray, and so I answered Him. And that's what prayer is. It's answering God.
Andre and Michael, thank you so much for sharing out of your own prayer journey, your faith journey. The earth now holds 6 billion people. The community of San Egidio, started by a high school student, has transformed the lives of tens of thousands of people. One person, or maybe one small group of people who are committed to an idea, can transform a city, a country, the world. We'll be right back for a final thought.
Hello. That's right, I said hello. I'm talking about an exciting new television channel that will change your life. My name is Ruth, and I want you to be one of the first to know about Hello Channel. Hello Channel is designed to teach you to speak English. Anyone can learn. We offer something for everyone. You'll see programming for children, teenagers, and adults, all on different levels. With Hello Channel, you'll hear, see, read, and speak English as you're watching entertaining television programs, making it easy to learn. If you've always wanted to learn English but haven't had a chance, Hello Channel is perfect for you. Start today, and remember, for a brighter future, just say hello.
I don't know what disappointments you've had in your life. I don't know what you've concluded about what prayer can do or can't do. But may I ask you to do this? Give conversation with God an honest try. No connection you can make is more important. At first it may be just a stumbling step. God help me. It may be just a tentative attempt to extend your trust. And even if you have given prayer a shot and didn't feel you were getting anywhere, believe me, God's listening. Remember, prayer is opening up your heart to God just like you would to your very best friend. The friendship that can develop, the trust that can grow is worth the investment. I know, and you can too. I'm Dwight Nelson, and that's what I believe. Join us next time for more of The Evidence.